We're taking you deep into the complicated world of your food supply. Whether it's a steak, salad, or slice of bread, there's a lot happening in the process of getting what you eat to your table, and you should know about it. Who owns the farmland? Who is growing your food? Do we have a secure food supply? Is our food safe? And are we stewarding the land and animals well in the process? In this 5-part series, we're pulling back the curtain and answering those questions. I'm Rita Rogers.
And I'm Cecily Dickey, and this is the Boom Clap podcast, where culture and conviction collide.
Regenerative farming is a catching phrase. It sounds wonderful, but what does it mean? And walked out, what does it actually look like for both farmers and consumers? In this opening episode, we talk first to Jason Rountree, a professor of animal science at Michigan State University, where he is the Charles Stewart Mott Distinguished Professorship for Sustainable Agriculture. And next, the well-known regenerative farmer Will Harris of White Oak Pastures comes on. We get into food production, subsequent, the healthfulness and quality of our food, and what it all ideally would look like, and where farming, again, ideally is moving. But every ideal has challenges. You'll find that this topic is no doubt a very complex one. This first episode strikes a chord on many themes that will be discussed throughout the entire 5-week series. Don't miss a single episode. Hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen and hear the story unfold. Well, I am so excited that you are coming on with us. I guess we decided to do this food supply series, and I just started jotting down everyone that I knew from ag, specifically cattle, in the day, and your name was on the list. And then interestingly, I was listening to content leading up to this, and I don't even know if you know this, you probably do, but I'd already told Cecily we should have you on, looked you up, and was like, he definitely is a really good fit for this series. And then I was listening to Will Harris on the Joe Rogan episode. And
Did
you hear your name on that?
Will's a good friend, and I work with him a lot. Will and I, amongst others, we went to Zimbabwe together and went to Alan Savory's ranch in northern Zimbabwe by Victoria Falls. And so that being with Will for 10 days out in the bush was quite a fun experience. And normally they keep it fairly stocked there. And the folks that hosted us said they never saw themselves run that short of red wine. And so it was a long, arduous experience in the bush for 10 days. And
oh man,
we played games like who could catch the scorpion with the glass, and just things you probably shouldn't be doing. But we had a great time together. And I his book is fantastic if y'all haven't read it. I mean, I just
no,
and like the way I think about this stuff is that I never want to pit farmers against each other. I never want to pit ag against each other. People have their own ways of doing things, right? And everybody has a different context and in a way they view things, right? And so Will's going to be a lot bolder than I am. He's that kind of human, and I'm kind of the meek academic. But when we talk about this stuff, we want to be driven by principles and led to outcomes. And any farmer, period, can adopt principles of soil health, right? Like, reducing tillage or improving biodiversity, and even getting grazing livestock back in our cropping systems, et cetera, And so it's always been good to hang with him and get his perspective. So.
Very cool. All right. I think this is a good time maybe for Jason, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up north of Houston, Texas, and grew up showing livestock. My dad's was a cosmetic dentist, but came into ag through the show ring. Right. Texas has a robust 4-H and FFA program, as y'all probably know, and so got real interested in livestock judging, and decided that in order to coach livestock judging teams, which I was really passionate about, I had to get additional degrees. And so I coached at Mississippi State and Michigan State, and where I met Rita in the last century, I think it was, and I think it was the last century, actually. Yeah,
it was.
My goodness.
Crazy thought.
Yeah, it sounds a long time ago, doesn't it? So
that's when you put it that way.
And so I coached judging teams, and then finished my PhD at MSU. And the closest place to home was at Louisiana State. And so my wife and I, from East Texas, Kara, she and our oldest, our only at the time, Asa, we came back and started in Baton Rouge. And, I was all excited about doing a lot of things that we did at MSU, purebred livestock and a lot of things. And instead of Angus and Herefords, we had Brangus and Brayfords. I mean, there's a lot more ear and Brahman influence down there. And so I was just kind of cruising along, and I always use this quote. Wendell Berry said, land-grant institutions are like airports. Once you've been to one, you've been to them all. And we always chase similar things, right? All these academics. And so I wasn't doing anything earth-shattering, just probably doing protein supplementation or something. And then we got hit by Hurricane Katrina in 2005. And it just blew the thing away, as you're aware. And I was actually south of the storm within a week of it happening, and got to see destruction firsthand. As you have seen all the videos, we had cows running everywhere. I distinctly remember we caught cows that started the storm with brands on ranches east of the Mississippi, and we caught them on the west side of the Mississippi River. And if you've been to New Orleans, you realize how big the water is through there. And so anyway, I didn't know what I called it at the time, but I looked around, and there's just a lot of agriculture, but there wasn't a ton of like food system resilience simultaneously. And so I started thinking about, how does that balance, right? How do we need big ag, we need to produce a lot of food, but simultaneously resilience at a very local level lends to having greater redundancy, right? Small and medium-sized packers and small and medium-sized food suppliers. So I started thinking about that a lot. And we stuck around in Louisiana till 2009 and enjoyed 4 major hurricanes in those 5 years. And growing up with them, I was kind of used to it. But Dr. David Hawkins, who's one of the most well-known men in the beef industry, the Angus industry, retired. And he was one of my major professors, he and Dr. Gretchen Hill. So when he retired, I came back up. I took his position, and I've been here since 2009. And in that context, I try to take those aspects of resilience, right? And thinking about more low input agriculture, more regionalized ag, and have been working in that context here now at MSU. I'm the CS Mott Endowed Chair for Sustainable Agriculture, and just working in that space. My main project now is I lead a co-lead, I should say, a $19 million project investigating how managing grazing livestock can improve soil carbon or its impacts on what we call the metrics, management, and monitoring of grazing. But we're real interested in how management improves ecosystem function.
Okay.
Very interesting. Yeah.
It is. That's a great background. Great background story. Thanks for sharing that with us.
I lied. Yeah. I'm joking.
It's all false. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so when we think of regenerative farming, I think a lot of this episode's going to be like regenerative farming. And that's a nice phrase, but what does that mean? Like, what?
So like, it's a great question, Rita, because there's a lot of there's a lot of opaqueness on definition. And, regeneration's roots are an ecological term, which effectively means, how can a system regenerate itself? How can a system ecologically regenerate and improve? Like I think of, resilience is about, it's like pulling that rubber band out and letting it go. And we put stressors on the system, and can they snap back or not? Can they respond positively or not? Or do they respond negatively? And what we're seeing with the impact of a combination of continued management that lends to less functioning water cycles or less functioning biology, combined with these issues that we're kind of seeing with climate, with rain and these weirder rain events and hotter and drier summers, et cetera, all lend to employing agriculture systems that can more aptly be resilient and regenerate and snap back when they're shocked, right? And so, I mean, there is a heck of a lot of nebular nature on these definitions. And so I go back to that. Let's be led by these principles, right? We have soil health principles that are tried and true. And, they are the fundamentals of regenerative ag. And how you adopt them at your farm, only the farmer really knows what's best, because every farm, it's like a fingerprint, right? It's like a print, and every farm's different. Every farmer's different. So how then can a farmer take this suite of potential, practices that are driven by these principles and lead to improved outcomes? It might be improved water cycling. It might be improved soil carbon sequestration, enhanced biodiversity, increased yield. That's an important one too, right? And in doing so, what many of the farmers would indicate testimonial-wise is that through adopting these principles, their costs tend to drop, relying on inputs. Maybe they have less passes with the tractor. Maybe they have less fertilizer inputs or chemical inputs, and that's lending to that piece of that point to resilience.
Okay, that's helpful. So I was looking at your profile and putting together questions and things for you, and I came across that you've helped with a protocol housed with Savory Institute that's ecological outcomes verification. Can you kind of explain that to people?
Yeah, so there are a world of verification programs now with regenerative ag. We have Regenify, which is the folks that work with understanding ag and kind of that group. There's the Regenerative Organic label. That is Patagonia. It's the Rodale Institute and others. Another one is called Land to Market, which started with the Savory Institute. Some of the clients they work with would be Applegate, which is the kind of organic arm now. They're the largest organic protein provider in the U.S., but Hormel's purchased them over time. Like Timberland and Uggs and kind of the leather and textile groups use that brand or use the label Land to Market. And so the guts behind Land to Market is called the ecological outcome verification. And what that is effectively what we say is that we take this ecological health index, and it's 16 indicators at the soil surface that reflect the 4 ecosystem processes: water, minerals, energy, and community dynamics, right? Or biodiversity. And it's effectively for us, we do grasslands more, right? But it's a year-to-year score on how a rancher's doing based on these metrics. And the important thing is we have baselines. We sort these things out in different ecoregions because, British Columbia, Cicely is much different from Illinois, which is much different from Michigan. So what we try to do is have like these reference sites that we think an environment and a farm is really high functioning. And we kind of use that as a baseline, as kind of a comparative nature. And then we have farms all over. So we're doing 50 to 60 farms in Michigan. Crops are always tougher because of the impacts and the things farmers have to do. It's a lot more focused. It's a lot more intensive typically than grazing systems are a lot of the time, but there are more of these also evolving in grazing and cropping systems as well.
Okay, that's interesting because, you hit on the baseline because that was my next question. Like, how do you have a baseline for what soil health is? And then Cecily and I have been talking because we've recorded some of these episodes already, and we've been talking, and I'm just like, it's so different talking to a cattle rancher than it is talking to a row crop farmer. It's just a completely different ballgame. And so it's interesting to hear you point that out, just the difference in doing quote regenerative farming with livestock versus grains and crops.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, because I know this there's a large dichotomy there, right? Where, you're in crop country. Our southern part of the state is. And, I kind of waltz in there, Mr. Know-It-All, and go talk to a farmer and say, hey, you need to be thinking about this. And they're just like, do you understand how complex all this is? And do you understand how much this equipment is? And do you understand how we're always pinched for time and challenged with weather and have all these things? And, you almost get a glassed over look, right? Like it's really, really difficult. And I always want to give honor to that, right? Like that, man, like we have like less than 1% of our country's farming anymore, right? And of that 1%, only a small majority are the ones farming the largest of those acreages, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're probably like at 0.2 or 0.3% are farming almost all of our cropland. And so, which I wish was different, but that's just the way it is. And so, I mean, you got to be understanding, right? That, hey, maybe getting some no-till and covers when appropriate are good. But it's always a challenge. And I never want to blame a farmer for, like making a decision they need to make to feed their family. And so I think that's important.
Yeah. All right. So when it comes to the ecological outcomes verification and savory, is there any coordination between government and this labeling system, or is it strictly like farmers going and getting this labeling system?
Yeah. You hit a really interesting, that's a great question, because brands will, like these labeling, these ways that we label food, they typically have to go through AMS, right? Like the Ag Marketing Service, and get approval. I just saw that there is some company in Pennsylvania that recently just got a regenerative chicken label, and so you have all of these savories included, right? You have all of these labels and ways of doing things for food. Some are very check the box. Like, okay, do you, like organic would be a lot of check the box, right? Like, do you spray or not? Do you, how, whatever. Where many of these are not heavily regulated. And I think as we expand out now, Land to Market and these others are, they're more qualitative in nature, is what I say. The thing I really love about what we helped Savory build was that these are outcome driven scores. We don't tell a farmer how to farm or a rancher how to graze. We just, hey, what are the outcomes ecologically? Are you seeing improvements in capturing energy or how the water's cycling through your property? So it isn't like you have to do a practice. It's all outcome driven, right? And I love that. Others maybe not so much. But with all that said, Rita, I think we're really headed down towards a road of considerably greater oversight. And that's primarily being driven from all the carbon claims that are beginning that we're seeing in food today. We just saw JBS recently get sued by the state of New York, which is serious. I mean, she got done with Trump and moved to JBS, right? And that kind of is an attention grabber. And so why? Well, there's a question on if this corporation properly stated their emission, that they were telling the public that what their emissions were, right? So as all these companies are out there at a bigger level saying, hey, we're dropping our emissions by 30%, or hold my beer, we're going to be carbon neutral in 30 years, or whatever, then how are they held accountable to that claim? And that's where we're lacking. And I see a immense amount of government movement in that space right now. And so we had recently Jeff Bezos commissioned Stanford University to actually do a report on all the climate smart dollars that came through the IRA bill that were multiple billion, and to say, hey, we're giving all these entities money to be regenerative or lower their carbon footprint, et cetera. How are we measuring that, folks? You're spending billions. Are you guys getting good outcomes or what? And the summary of the Stanford report was that they're not measuring it very well at all. So here we are making all these claims, but there's very little oversight in how those claims are assessed. Without question, corporations need standardization because they're global. Cargill and all these entities, it could be a McDonald's, it could be Tyson, they're all global, right? And so here they are trying to abide by all these standards and metrics, and it's a big international challenge, right? And so we're definitely headed that direction to see considerably greater oversight in the claims made on food through the agriculture supply chain.
Something that we're going to talk about later in this series actually is food labeling. And a lot of these labeling situations turn into a bit of a greenwashing situation. It's something that Rita and I have talked about before.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I don't know if we're coming from exactly the same standpoint on it, but I mean, Rita and I are never fans of like government oversight coming up more and more and more. Yeah. However, you know, with claims being made, I can see how oversight is needed to kind of like stop people from that greenwashing. But Rita, I'll let you jump in here because I'm sure you have something to say to jump right off of what I said.
Well, what you were saying moved us really good into the next area that I would like to talk about, which is the cattle, methane production, CO2, all of that kind of, I guess that genre, if you will. So
it's a genre, all right. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. There's a lot coming from the government on this. And I guess my question is, I think regenerative ag and all of that is great if we're coming at it from a standpoint of like our motivation matters. Like, what is our motivation for regenerative ag? Is it soil health, food quality, animal husbandry, or is it decreasing CO2? Because those two things are going to lead to massively different outcomes. Maybe not in the short term. Maybe in the short term, the same thing happens, but in the long term, something very different happens. And I'm wondering if the ag industry is buying into the climate thing and the CO2 thing to kind of, you know, get on board and do the quote right thing to stay relevant, but at the same time, like shooting themselves in the foot. Does that make sense? Like, are we we like trying to make cattle better, but going to get rid of cattle in the long run by buying in?
Okay. So I'm going to start so I think the first way to envision this is that we have a very complex and diverse supply chain. And at the very, at the consumer end of the equation, there are consumers that do want to buy products that have these claims.
True.
But let's put this over there and let's focus on the big suppliers, right? And most of those are working with the scientifically based target initiatives called SBTI, which is a conglomerate of NGOs that are working to create roadmaps for companies to claim emission reductions. Okay. And there are many models, there are many uncertainties. It's a very difficult thing to do. You think about a Cisco that's delivering all sorts of products to all their consumers, and they're asked to monitor their Scope 3 emissions, which Scope 3 are the emissions at the furthest concentric circle outward that basically is trying to capture all the emissions in what they do. Think of McDonald's trying to do that. Think of others. Think about the issues with traceability and allocation of an emission all through these supply chains. So you have this big muddled mess, right? Then as we work backwards down that supply chain, let's say we get to a feed yard, a packer. That's the next one, right? And that packer is selling to these big corporations, right? And these corporations are publicly owned. And they've got people on their boards screaming for ESG or screaming that they reduce emissions because their stocks are going to drop and they're going to get held accountable. So the packers are like, oh, okay, we're gonna try to see what we can do on this, realizing the complexity of a packing industry, right? They've got cattle coming in. We can break down a carcass into a million different cuts and pieces, and then we're sending them a million different directions. It's impossible, right, to capture that. But yet here we are. So then the packer calls the feed yard, say, hey, feed yard operator, you got to get it together. We got to figure out what's going on here and how we can help reduce this and measure this and do whatever. And then, okay, think about it. 70 to 80% of the beef cattle emission footprint's on the cow-calf producer, which is a positive and negative. The positive is there's a lot of low-hanging fruit can, I think, soften that blow. I also think we can model it and measure it much. But at the end of the day, how we measure a carbon footprint doesn't make a damn to a cow-calf producer who is just trying to improve their land. They're trying to improve their weaning weights or their costs or anything like that. So at one end of the supply chain, we had this language that is permeating on industry and regulation and interface with government. And on the other end, where the most benefit can happen on the land, you've got producers that are concerned with the complete different language and different goals and different outcomes. And the final thing I'll say is nobody has waived the immense amount of green dollar bills that's going to be necessary to do all of this in that supply chain, right? And so what do? We target the easy, efficient stuff. We say, okay, methane is bad, which I don't agree with, but methane is bad. Methane is 70% of footprint, lower methane. And well, we do a great job of that in the feed yard. We can use ionophore, we can use an implant, we can improve genetics. So all that's got to work for the cow-calf guy too, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't. That's antagonistic often to what happens at a ranch, right? Mm-hmm. The rancher's thinking about cow costs. They're thinking about improving land. They're thinking about these other things, right? And so at some point, we have to see a huge shift in how we monetize this system, if indeed carbon is going to be this entity that has to be accounted for through that supply chain, right? I hate it. I agree there's a hyper focus on carbon. We lose aspects of when you see windmills on fire in the panhandle, I think we're approaching the wrong ecosystem process, right? Yeah. We're worried about energy when we should be focused on water. And that's the main thing, is that we're driven by the end user down this carbon pathway that really hasn't made a hell of a lot of sense for the people producing food.
Yeah. I don't even know where to go from there because I wasn't really sure how you would respond to that. And it is so on wind for a second, we're, out in the prairie here. And so the wind is constantly coming, like they constantly are pressing to put wind on our ground. And I'm just like, speaking to our county board and saying, these people want to, quote, abate farming, like they want to do away with farming. So why are we inviting them onto our property? I know the dollars look good up front, but it doesn't pan out long term. And so I just worry that with the cattle industry and hearing constantly how, cows are bad, cows are harming the environment, but seeing kind of the cattle industry move towards like, okay, we'll fix ourselves. It's almost like we're kind of leaning into that language. It's going to eventually like abate cattle farming. And I was looking up an article from, I think it was from Berkeley News from 2022. It said a new study of the climate impacts of raising animals for food concludes that phasing out all animal agriculture has the potential to substantially alter the trajectory of global warming. Our work shows that ending animal agriculture has the unique potential to significantly reduce atmospheric levels of all three major greenhouse gases, which, because we have dithered in responding to the climate crisis, is now necessary to avert the climate catastrophe. And this is an investigator from UC Berkeley, Howard Hughes. And I'm just like, okay, so we'll fix cattle a little bit, but also we're appeasing the people that want to get rid of animal agriculture altogether.
Dithered is such a nice new Berkeley word. I don't think I've used that one before. It is like, so you're right, dude. And like, so I think that let's start. You said
I don't know if there's a good answer. I don't know if there's a good answer.
Let me first unpack the energy. I'm going to say it's an energy crisis on land use today, right? So we, and I've got a friend. His name is Max Jones. I work with a lot in Michigan, and he kind of got me to thinking this way. I don't want to take all the credit, but the fact is that we look at a farmer as a food producer, period. Okay. Often they may just be a commodity producer. We need those. So what we do is we say, oh, well, in order to help with water quality in the West Lake Erie Basin, because we're getting too much phosphorus from manure or fertilizer, and people in Toledo can't drink their water, we'll give you 10 or 20 bucks to do something different. Okay. Remember, it's farm policy that dictates how we farm in the first place. Okay. It isn't just like this beautiful capitalistic system that is not government involved, right? It's heavily government involved. A farmer gets 8 to 10 cents on the food dollar. And of that 8 to 10 cents, there's obviously government intervention in that. But that's what we're going to do. But then I can also go and knock on that same farmer's door and say 8 or 10, like 10 or 20 bucks an acre, or hey, we'll pay you $1,500 an acre to put solar panels on your farm. Mm-hmm. You've got $1,500 with no labor, or you've got $10 to $20. That is a money losing proposition. But we value energy in one arm, but we don't value clean water on the other. And my point then is that we need to quit just thinking about a farmer as a food producer and thinking of them as contractors for clean air, clean water, enhanced biodiversity, improved nutrient density of food, food security, all of these things that meet at the energy, the water, and the food security nexus. And only until we start thinking about the cost benefit, like, so how are we going to get the things we care about when we throw pennies at it, And the way I parallel it, and I'll hush after this, I'm on a roll, that I had coffee, that we think about the roads, right? Our governor, Governor Whitmer, she put her, like, when she ran the first time, it was, the quote was, fix our damn roads. And in Michigan, they're bad. And I'm sure in Illinois and Canada, they're bad too. But they're pretty bad with all our freeze and thaw, right? So what do? We're at it, man. We're fixing our damn roads, and we're throwing billions at it, and we're going to redo our infrastructure. And so it's almost in certain ways, there's a lot of these acres. We need to fix our damn fields. Okay. We have issues. We've had poor government policies dictate where we put things, and it doesn't make any sense. But because of that, we're having some environmental feedbacks that are negative. What we want to do instead of fixing our damn roads is we just want to get a truckload of asphalt and a couple shovels and fill some potholes. That's how we treat agriculture. And so until we can get agriculture and the importance of land management and what it does for the future of our society on the same level as where we are with energy, we're not going to get there. Last year, energy, McKinsey report indicated we had $550 billion invested in the energy industry in the U.S. We had $35 billion invested in agriculture. So until we can get to that 15-fold difference to even up this score, we're going to continue to see the problems we see today.
That's interesting. Hadn't really thought of it that way. I don't know. I'm just not a fan of government being more involved in the first place. So I kind of balk at that. Yeah. I'm not going to lie. But it is an interesting way of thinking of it, I guess, just spotting the difference and how the industries are treated.
How do you think about crop insurance though?
The same. Like my husband, well, we actually talked about this. We will talk about this, but my husband, I had recently seen, I can't remember what it was. It was some kind of maybe RFK video that somebody had posted, and people were complaining. And I'm not saying I agree with what he was saying. Like he was saying basically stop the chemical use on, crops. And my husband and I are both like, yeah, that would be awesome. Like we would love to stop spraying chemicals and everything's great, but not necessarily agreeing with how he was going about it. But the point is the farmers quoted were saying, like, don't mess with our farm bill. And I'm like, y'all are starting to sound like a bunch of union workers, like just wanting the government to intervene, And so I asked my husband what he was thinking of it. And he just, talked about the crop insurance from the standpoint of how heavily it's subsidized. And it's just it doesn't remove all the risk, but it takes some of the risk out of farming. And it does, in a way, allow, and maybe he would say it differently. I might butcher the way he would say it, but it basically changes the losers and winners a bit and allows sometimes for people who maybe wouldn't be the best decision makers to continue on farming.
So it kind of maybe
does that make sense?
that, it kind of enables some behavior issues. Yeah,
possibly.
No,
yes,
it does. And I, a lot of the folks that I've worked with, they're off crop insurance because a lot of what they do is uninsurable, and they're happy. Right, they're happy.
But there are some laws for it. Like if you're buying farm ground, I think there is law that where you have to have insurance and things. So
exactly. And so to that point, I think, and the people I talk to in these circles, whether it be in food or ag, is that at the end of the day, it ain't going to be the capitalist market that spins it. It ain't going to be government. It's going to be insurance companies, and that. Because they rule the damn world, right? But the fact is that, just look at property insurance today and look at the floods down in my home country of Houston area. Again, right? Here's another flood. New Orleans, here's another flood. California, here's another fire. At some point, the insurance companies are going to walk. And what's going to begin to happen, I think, is that we are going to kind of start thinking about farming and other things in a way that is more driven by resilience than yield. And we've only been programmed to enhance yield, right? Output per unit input. There's no other worry about it. But we have starting to see some negative feedbacks in that system. But we keep it afloat through a lot of the insurance policies. And I, again, don't want to ever judge a farmer or anybody for how they choose to do their own business.
Yeah.
What I do think, like the way that in my little head that it might work, is we need more data. We need more information. And if the government would monetize that, if they would help us understand, like our goal and what we do is we want to measure every acre and understand what's happening with carbon, phosphorus, water, etc. There are satellites that go over every farm now like 10 times a day. All right.
Wow.
And it's legal. And so ship has left the port when it comes to feeling like you're spied on or what's happening at your landscape. Crazy. The booger man knows. Okay. Big brother knows. I mean, it's there. It's not changing. So can we, instead of making that a negative, work with government and the things that we can do technologically to enhance the landscape, to say here, ties that shift and begin to think of it that way, but then have the baton pass over to the private industry. Well, what is that carbon or water or biodiversity or phosphorus reduction worth to society? Because they're making the claims and they always go back to the farmer. And I feel like you said, what is your passion on the regen deal? It's I don't want to see rural communities extracted continually over time. And the rural areas I live in, I've been here for a while, they just get poorer and poorer often to me. I don't see places getting fixed up. I just see them getting more dilapidated. And I don't want to say that as a blanket, but it's awful tough for a lot of folks in rural communities. And I just feel like there are opportunities because our farmers are standing on solutions with the land that they manage that can appease to a lot of the issues that cities are having with water and other things. And we can do this in a way where everybody wins.
Okay. And I don't mean to bring this back to something that may not even be important. I just want to know because I'm super curious. You say that a lot of the farmers you work with have stepped away from farm insurance because they're uninsurable. So what's an example of what would make someone uninsurable via an insurance company?
They may put in covers. And let me be frank there that farm policies are beginning to change, in terms of insurance and what is and isn't insurable. But, some folks may go out for a year and leave a very diverse cover that instead of using it for a crop, they may have a really diverse annual and then go in and graze it off and then come in with a cereal grain behind it. Right. So really they're not quote unquote growing a crop. And so they're diversifying the rotations.
Right.
Often for many times, if something that was green was growing, you couldn't claim drought. Well, I put in a cover because I didn't want my soil to blow away, but that wasn't insurable. Right. And so those things are beginning to slowly change. I really think a lot of Senator Stabenow. She's from Michigan. I've had the opportunity to meet with her. I spoke, I guess it'll be 2 years this fall. I gave testimony to the Senate Ag and Nutrition and Forestry Committee in DC, and got to go meet the folks on our Senate Ag Committee and talk about these things we're talking about, and so there are listening, I think, when it comes to the Farm Bill. I know we all get frustrated, but they are listening. And but what I think I don't want to see happen is we just perpetuate a business as usual attitude, but kind of do this regenerative high five, right? And I don't like that. I think that's the essence of greenwashing, and some days I wonder, I'm like, okay, does it matter if I help somebody make regenerative corn syrup, right? Like, is this a good thing to make regenerative corn syrup? It's still corn syrup. And, right. And I'm like, there's still a lot of, and back on that insurance deal, I mean, we're having kids today that are diabetic and are dealing with colon cancer in their teens.
Awful.
We have to change that. Something is desperately wrong. And I'm not blaming the farmer. I mean, it's not that. I mean, we're paid, farmers are paid to do something, right? And but man, we've got to link that, and that's what I learned in DC, right? Is the Republican side of the table on that? They were all about their neighbor. They were about their neighbor that farms, and they were about overregulation. They were about waters of the USA. They were thinking that our friends aren't making that much money. There's constant bureaucracy and regulation, and they wanted to lessen that burden. Check. I'm all there. Like the Democrats, I felt like that I spoke with for most of the situation, they were thinking a lot more about the complexity and challenges of the food system, right? Where we're subsidizing one area to produce things that are making people sick on the other end, right? And so they were kind of thinking about it because most of them were from more urban areas. So they were probably thinking about it more from a standpoint of health and well-being. And why do we make a bag of chips more affordable than an apple, for example? Some of those kind of really deep conversations. So it was really interesting. I learned a lot doing that.
It is interesting. So you would say you think overall the government does want to help fix this problem?
Well, man, you're just walking me down the plank, Rita.
I'm sorry. I can answer how I feel about it if that's better.
No, I get it. I mean, I think that what I want to say is I think that they are working to make improvements in the system. I feel like that is there. How this looks, it'll probably get all screwed up. I mean, by the time law gets made and it gets through every lobbyist and every, blah, blah, blah. But what I want to say is I don't think the people there are inherently bad and they're inherently trying to make something worse. It is a people problem, right? Like it is a social issue. I just like, I don't know, dude. What do you think, Rita?
I mean, I think there are people in the government that want to make things better. I don't think, like you said, they're not all bad. I think that at the highest levels, there's a lot of control from the NGOs and a lot of UN agenda pushing things and a lot of globalist agenda pushing things. And I don't necessarily think that is a good thing. And I shouldn't even say necessarily. That is not a good thing in my mind.
No, so I agree. And it's like that. Like, we, on the point of emissions, right? U.S., our numbers always come around 9 to 10% of our country's emissions. 9 to 10% are used to produce the amount of food we produce in this country. Okay. Of that 9%, 60% are livestock. Of that 60%, 60 to 70% are ruminants. And so, cattle are 2% of our country's footprint is what I'm trying to say. So the cleverness of this is that often we compare food on a weight basis, right? So we're going to compare a pound of turnips to a pound of beef or a pound of pork. Well, think about nutrient density, right? You begin to put this on essential amino acids, man, all of a sudden things change in a hurry, right? And the problem, I think, in all of this is the way we measure impact leads to unintended consequences. And, our data from MSU, I've been measuring emissions. I've been measuring carbon in our systems for well over a decade. And we have considerably less footprint and emissions when we impact the amount of when we take in the amount of carbon that we're seeing in our system being built. We're considerably less than what the UN and the IPCC models said it should be. And there's no nuance in the discussion, right? We treat everything the same. We don't treat a farm like a fingerprint. We just want to blanket put a formula to say beef bad, celery good.
All right. On the topic of ruminants, has the amount of ruminant animals increased? I don't even know what time frame to put it over, but any time frame, I guess. Have we been monitoring that? Because all of a sudden it's like war on cows.
Yeah. So there's been several papers published on this, and generally the ones I read would suggest that indeed no, there aren't more ruminants. Okay. There probably was considerably greater megafauna that were belching that much more methane pre-civilization. I want to add a little nuance to this debate, though, but you also have to think about, okay, well, ruminants are part of a natural functioning grassland ecosystem, right? They graze, the microbes in their gut break down fiber. A byproduct of that is enteric methane, CH4, goes up in the atmosphere. Normally, methane is hydroxylated by OH radicals in a 8 to 10 year window, and the outcome of that is carbon dioxide and water, or rain, H2O, which lends to the next rain event. The CO2 is absorbed again for photosynthesis, right? It's a very natural biological system. So now the devil's advocate in all this could say, well, but many of our ruminants aren't on grasslands anymore. They're in confinement. They're on concrete. They're in a feed yard, right? So then it's really not as functioning of a natural biological system anymore, because we're bringing feed in, we're moving cattle in, right? So it becomes kind of a messy debate when you start going down this road, and there's really not a great answer. But what I can tell you is that we published a paper. I didn't lead it. I had the young guys, I call them, led it, Matt Beck and Logan Thompson. Matt's at ARS, Logan's at K-State. We looked at different ways of assessing the global warming impact of methane in the U.S. over the last 20 years, I think it was. And we treat methane as a global warming. We use these things called global warming potentials. That means, okay, one molecule of CO2 is your baseline. And that one molecule of CO2 traps so much heat. Well, methane has 25 or so times the heat trapping ability as CO2. One molecule, methane, is 25% more capable of trapping heat than one molecule of CO2. Methane is more, if I said that right, nitrous oxide is 300. So the byproducts of nitrogen fertilizer dwarf CO2 and are 12-fold greater than methane, right? But the problem is that methane isn't in the environment for 100 years. It's only in the environment for about 9 to 12. So we treat it over a longer period of time. Now, granted, you would have a greater concentration of methane in a shorter window that traps more heat when you start looking at these models. But what we also have known is in the U.S., cattle numbers have decreased significantly over the last 20 years. So we actually wrote a paper about this and found that using today's IPCC suggested models, that methane was being over accounted for in global warming in the U.S. by 12-fold. Not 12%, 12-fold. Huge differences in how we account for it. Much less. In fact, in some years, there's also almost like a cooling effect because there's so much less methane. Now, what's also increased, though, y'all, is manure. And that manure is increased through dairy and swine operations throughout the U.S. So you could argue, if you use that mentality, the manure coming off methane is much greater also. I didn't mean to go down a rabbit hole there on that.
No, that's good.
We typically find that methane in our systems are maybe 10, 15% less than what the models say they are when we actually measure it. But stepping back from this, that's the problem, right? Is we hyper-focus on the CO2 metric, CO2 equivalent, that reflects methane and nitrous oxide and CO2. But what we should be more aptly thinking about, again, is how is water? How's biodiversity? What's the bird habitat looking like? What's the butterfly habitat, the bees, those things. But we hyper-focus on these metrics, and it really, I don't think, is making a positive impact.
Yeah. Well, I think that goes back to my point, which I'm not even sure if I really made my point clear earlier, is I think that governments want to focus on that because I think there's an ulterior motive here when it comes to focusing on the CO2. And I just hope that as the agriculture industry goes on, we're not, like I said earlier, shooting ourselves in the foot by playing into the CO2 thing.
Right.
So speaking to that and speaking to cattle, can we talk about lab grown or cultivated meat for a little bit? Because this is being sold as a solution.
Yeah, well, I mean, I get it.
I think I want to talk to it the same way you would like to speak to it probably. But when it comes to that, it's not a good solution, right?
The latest LCAs I've seen are staggering when you compare lab-grown meat to farm-raised meat. The fact is, it requires, when you take Mother Nature out of the equation, all right, and you say, okay, we're going to do this in a lab versus using photosynthesis, then the energy is staggering, the needs to create lab-grown meat. That's the main problem. Number two, the issues of keeping these cell cultures sterile, because we are eating this stuff, right? Equally formidable. Number three, creating the structural integrity of the meat, of the proteins, huge issues. Generally, when you see lab-grown meat, it's like being hand shoveled out of vats, right? It isn't.
Oh, that's
it
sick.
Isn't this like structural. Yeah, it's really it's pitiful, man. And so, if you think about the chemicals and the additives, and that's another strike. Okay, I think there's a reason we've seen Impossible and Beyond. Oh, we're talking lab grown there. The same issues can be made about a lot of the plant-based stuff in terms of the additives and the other things. But bottom line, you can't beat Mother Nature. Okay. Can we do a better job? Absolutely. And we should. But the real thing that pissed me off about it, and I knew it was coming. Right before the pandemic, I went to this Future of Food conference. And it was hosted by this cool magazine. I forgot its name, but they're owned by People magazine. And so they flew me out to I flew out, I can't remember who paid for it, but Manhattan, right? And I gave I was the beef guy. And we're talking about the future of food. Well, I'm all about this regenerative space, right? I feel like that's this next iteration. And so I'm all excited. And it come to find out it was basically filled with young lady nutritionists that were all as big around as my pinky. The things, it was a very vegan centric kind of thing, right? And all of the people that were speaking there were tech that were lab grown, vegan ice cream through, making whey, taking whey protein and, putting it in a big cement mixer and, whatever. Right. But y'all, billions of dollars were flowing into it. And this would have been probably 18 or 19. And I was like, oh man, we're screwed. Cause I thought I was hoping that money would come into what we're doing on the land, right? That this would be the stimulus to enhance, regeneration in our systems, et cetera. And I was like, everybody, all they give a shit about is Moore's Law, which is the old linear line, right? That if we can get the investment, we can make a computer chip faster and cheaper on a linear basis. And that's the same mentality that built the iPhone. And what they want to do then is put this natural complex system of biology and make Moore's law apply to it. And the best way in the Silicon Valley and the East Coast mentalities of investment are to invest in technological endeavors oriented towards food, which are lab grown, which are plant-based, which are synthetic, et cetera, right? And I saw that happening. So this had been a good probably 6-7 years ago. And I realized that, oh man, we're screwed. And I still think that the monies have gone that way. And the last thing I'll say is that I don't want to be too harsh on Impossible or Beyond, because there is still a farmer behind it. I think the owner, I think some of the claims they've made are erroneous. I think they should be held accountable. But at the end of the day, there's still a farmer that produced the pea and a farmer that produced that soybean. And I think we have to be careful not to have a circular firing squad on food simultaneously. But there are a lot of bad actors that are suggesting environmental outcomes, healthful outcomes, and they're just not there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good point.
Well, I'm glad you told that story.
Yeah, me too. Me too. That was really interesting. And I don't know. I
starved to death. I starved to death at the Future of Food meeting.
I can imagine.
My friend Sarah Place, actually, she worked for the Cattlemen's and she's now at CSU. We were together. I was the beef guy and she was the beef gal. And it was just us two. There was some poor dude from the chicken industry there. But anyway, hold on. We starved to death. And we went to a game at Yankee Stadium, and I ate 2 of those big ass hot dogs I was dying. It was the best meal I've ever had in my whole life. This horrible ass hot dog, because I was dying. But anyway, the people were nice.
So, I can relate.
Why did they have you there, do you think?
I was there to talk about regenerative ag. Yeah, that's why. And Sarah was there representing more of the broader beef industry, and I think the other guy was from Purdue Chicken. They're doing some cool stuff at Purdue. They've been real pioneers in antibiotic-free poultry. I mean, they've really pushed in that space.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I don't know. It's just interesting. I try to feed my family really healthy and be picky about the foods that we're buying and things. And it's just there's always, I guess, the vegan push, like you said, it's interesting when you buy foods, you're always buying into an agenda anymore as well. The labeling, just how they present their packaging and renewable energy and all of this. It's all you can't just buy food without buying it into an agenda anymore. And that's a little troubling for me as well.
Yeah.
But anyway, this was great.
I do think we need to push forward, right? And I think that I do see a lot of opportunities. And to your point on human health, right? I mean, I do believe a lot of the data I see on glyphosate. It's ubiquitous today. I mean, it's in everything, right? And I don't think that's cool. I don't think we should be using it to spray as a desiccant on wheat right before we harvest it, right? I think that there are things we can do and do better.
Hey, can I ask you that really quick? Do people, so I've been looking for somebody to speak to that, because we don't have wheat around us. The only time we plant wheat is if there's a project or something, we'll plant a little wheat beforehand. I think I've been married to my husband almost 18 years, and I think we've had wheat maybe twice on a field. But that doesn't, they don't do that. They don't spray Roundup right before they harvest, but we're not wheat farmers. So is that really a thing? That really does happen?
Absolutely it is. Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah. And again, it's custom harvesters, a lot of ground, got to cover, wheat's drier.
Okay. Just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah.
Because it's a question I've had.
It's a thing. But I think we can do better, and the modeling that we're now doing. I co-direct a Center for Regenerative Ag at MSU, and the modeling that we're able to do today, that you look at a field and what we can see. I've got a colleague, his name's Bruno Basso. He started a company called SIBO, and had some big investors like Peter Thiel from PayPal, that he started that with Elon, and a guy named Al Gore invested. And and others, right? Like, but the amount of imagery that we can get on a field today, that a field is not a field. There is so much variation. We look at a field and think it looks the same, but when you start looking at how the water table cycles through a piece of land, where the soil is really stable and really rich, that you can till it and it's not going to erode. It's not going to. Other areas are highly erodible, highly fragile, right? And a field isn't a field anymore, and a farm isn't a farm anymore. And I believe that there's going to be a lot of upcoming technologies with drones, with smarter tractors that are really going to get this precision piece figured out much better, to where we can have appropriate buffer strips that aren't going to be a pain in the neck to get in or be problematic from a productivity perspective. I just have a lot of hope and confidence that many of these things down the line are gonna improve what we do. And so I am hopeful in that context for sure.
That's good. All right. I don't know. This was really good. Really good conversation.
Yeah. Very good.
I appreciate you coming on with us. So
no problem. I'm going to go hit the barn. We got show pigs. I'm going to go see what the status is.
We have
a
few of those in our barn too. So
all
right. Well, thank you so much.
Y'all.
I appreciate it.
Reed, I'm so proud of you. I mean, I think I met you when you're like 17, dude. And so you're doing great. And I'm just so thankful, Cecily, to meet you also. And so
it was really great to meet you. Appreciate it. Thank you for coming on. The COVID years really opened up people's eyes to the instability and uncertainty of our world, particularly when it comes to food supply. Food supply is obviously a passion topic for Rita and I, and through this series, we wanted to help you and your families find practical ways to secure your food supply and feel good about the quality of your food. ARC seed kits are one of the best ways that we have encountered to do this. This is a small family-owned and operated business based in northern Michigan. Their mandate is to prepare every home in America with food and economic security by having the ability to grow their own food from heirloom seeds. Heirloom seeds are an important piece of the puzzle as they reproduce, unlike hybrid seeds. This means that you will be able to save seeds to replant year after year, ensuring your own food supply. Their all-in-one kit is an amazing option with over 50,000 seeds made up of 65 varieties. These seeds have a shelf life of 15 years, which is incredible. It also includes a seed guide telling you what you need to know about growing your food. As a longtime gardener myself, I can tell you that this is the most economical way to buy seeds for your garden. And it can be even more economical because ARC Seeds is giving our listeners 10% off when they enter the code BOOMCLAP with their order. So visit arcseedkits.com or click the link in our show notes and enter the code BOOMCLAP to save yourself 10% and get you started on your way to further securing your food supply.
I'm really excited to tell you about one of our sponsors, Barn to Door. Whether you're a consumer looking for food for your family or a farmer looking to feed the community, Barn to Door has something for you. One of the things that they communicated to us is they're trying to give back farmers some time. One of the things that's really complicated with farming is you've got all this work that goes into your product and production, but then you also have to connect with the consumer. And that takes a lot of time. And so they're simplifying this for you. So if you're a farmer, go to barntodoor.com to learn more about how they can help you with your brand presence and make it easier for buyers to purchase from you. But if you're a consumer, you also are looking for these local farms to buy from. You can't just go to the grocery store and find your local farmer in the grocery store. You need to connect directly with them. So go to localfarmfinder.com to discover the farmers in your own community. All right. Thank you so much for coming on with us, Will, Mr. Harris. I'm not really sure. I think maybe your Southern way of talking leads me to think I should call you Mr. Harris.
Will is fine.
Okay.
It's fine. You're perfectly fine.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Yeah. Thank you for your interest. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're definitely very interested. We've seen a lot of your content and what you're doing, and we love it, and we're very intrigued. So we're excited to learn more, especially we're doing this series, a podcast series right now on food supply. And so when we were looking for guests that fit that bill, you were one of the first ones that we were like, okay, I think Will Harris is going to be a great guest for this one. And we actually just spoke with your acquaintance or your friend, Jason Rountree, as well.
Dear friend.
Yeah. And you guys are going to be on the same episode, like back to back. And he didn't know that either. And he brought you up just by chance. So this is perfect.
And now I'm intimidated being on the same slate with Jason. He's so intelligent and smart.
Well, you know what is true about both of you is you both have great Southern accents. Distinctly different, but they're great.
Yeah, he's from Mississippi originally.
Okay, very cool. Yeah.
Yep, he's good. It was a great conversation, and I look forward to this as well. I think it's just good hearing from somebody, same topic, regenerative farming, but somebody who's, living it and doing it versus someone who's studying it a little bit more. So it'll be neat hearing your perspectives.
And it's a really great relationship between Jason and us. He's so often I went to the University of Georgia, graduated in 1976, so it's an old education. But college professors tend to be very siloed in their knowledge and understanding. The soils guy knows soils, the animal, the cattle health guy knows that, the plant specialist knows plants, and there's just not much. And then what we do out here, it's got to all work together. And Jason does a fantastic job getting out of that silo.
Well, that's a great point, because in order to farm effectively, actually, whether you're conventional or regenerative, all of those things are going to be overlapping all of the time. So to have someone who, studies it and is an academic, but can still manage to mesh it together like a farmer has to, that's important.
Yeah.
Well, and it's I don't know if we're doing the interview right now or not, but this is important. What happened in post-World War II is we turned a very cyclical system, producing food, farming, into a very linear system. And linear lends itself to silos, and it's just one way, and cyclical is never-ending and perpetual.
Well, and that's how nature is, right? So to work against it is not always the most beneficial thing.
And it's what we do with industrial monocultural farming.
True. Yeah.
So I guess what kind of farming did you do before making the switch to regenerative? Were you in cattle always, or were you crops? Like, how did that go before you switched?
I was a monocultural cattleman. I only raised cattle as the only species. And my pastures were Tifton 85 Bermuda grass. And if you were another plant growing out there, I would spray you with a herbicide to get rid of you. So very, very monocultural and very much part of the chain. I raised calves to send to the West to be fed, to be sent to the slaughter plant. Now it's we are a complete chain. It's a tiny little chain. We're the whole food chain.
Yeah.
And we added other species. We now raise, whereas I raised only cattle, we raise cows, hogs, sheep, goats, rabbits, and poultry.
Wow.
And vegetables and honey and other things.
Yeah, that's what I was going to be curious about. I was curious if you did anything besides animals, but you go right down to bees. So you're even working on the pollinators and everything there.
Yeah, we're primarily animal farmers, but we do have a large vegetable garden, and we do have probably 50-something beehives.
Okay.
So we have laying chickens, which is a little different.
Yeah. So when you decided, because it was you that kind of decided to make this big change after your family had been that monoculture type rancher for generations, I think you had said, right?
Yeah, my dad industrialized the farm after World War II, because that's when you did it.
Yeah.
He ran it very industrially for his entire career. And I came home and intending to run it that way my entire career, and did for 20 years. And I started moving away from it.
So what was that thing that caused you to start moving away from it? Was it some sort of conviction or some sort of like education? Like what made you kind of realize that this wasn't the direction you wanted to go?
Well, it's not very, it didn't speak very well for me, but I was an extreme case. I abused the tools. If the label instruction said put a pint, I probably put a quart. Per acre. If it said give them 2 cc's per 100 pounds of body weight, I probably gave them 4 cc's per 100 pounds of body weight, and that was just my nature. But I think it allowed me to see the unintended negative consequences of that system more so than my friends and neighbors and relatives who were playing more by the rules.
Right. So for you, it sounds like it was more like a slow coming to a realization of like, no, I'm doing these things and I'm seeing these consequences. And it was probably just built up over a period of years until you made that decision to.
That's the way it seems like it should have been, but really it was more, it didn't take that long.
Gotcha.
I'm not much of a deliberator. And,
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, it's not necessarily good, but it's just a fact. But when I realized that, this is not really right, I moved away from it very quickly. And I would say probably too quickly, because I was just moving away from that model, not really towards anything. So I went from making money every year to losing some money some years. I had made money every year that I farmed. And I'm not bragging. We had a lot of money. We did not make a lot of money, but we were profitable every single year. And when I gave up the tools, I had some years that I lost money.
Right. Because it's not like, go ahead, Rita.
That's something to say, like being profitable every year, because that's not always the case with farming, and so I
had some advantages. I had inherited 1,000 acres of land that was paid for.
Okay.
I inherited a herd of about 700 mama cows that was paid for. A little bit of money, not a lot, but a little bit. So I had some, and I was an only child, so I got the entire estate. So I had some advantages that allowed me to make the changes. And I've been, I had no debt. Had I had debt, I probably couldn't have done it.
Yeah.
And I'll say this, when I did it through pure luck, it was exactly the right time to do it. I mean, I had heard a little bit of this in the mid-90s, and grass-fed beef was not yet a thing. That didn't happen until about 2000 or so. So, I heard of these things, and I was moving away from a system I didn't like. I was not moving towards a system that I hoped to be part of. It just kind of worked that way.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your humility in all of this, because a lot of people, they make a change in their business that ends up working, not necessarily through anything of their own, but they like to really claim the credit for that. And you're actually approaching it from a completely different perspective, just saying, I had some advantages, and you pointed out the flaws in your way of farming beforehand that led you to that. I think that's a rare thing. So I know that's not what this podcast episode is about, but I do appreciate that about your character. That's a rare thing that's worth celebrating for sure.
Well, I'm not. I didn't tell the story to be celebrated. I just trying to tell you how it happened.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that.
So back to the unintended consequences. So I think we know what some of the unintended consequences of using, like the things you're talking about are. But what did you see? Because at the time, like you were in the conventional way of farming. So you're not going out looking for these unintended consequences, right? You're not like, I think this is bad, so I'm going to watch and see what happens. So what did you like physically see that made you decide Like, I'm changing. I'm going to stop doing this and move towards something else. I don't know what that is, but something else.
That's a good question. So there are basically three things that we focus on here. Animal welfare. I'm sorry. A lot of pollen here. Regenerative land management, and the enriching this local impoverished rural community. And the animal welfare was the first thing that hit me, and but it was immediately followed by the land management. I mean, it's just like, I don't mind. That's a problem too. I would have, when I was raising cattle conventionally before I started changing monocultural cattle, I really believed I was a very good animal welfare patron. I mean, I thought at that time, I believe, this is what most people believe today, that if you keep your animals well fed, well watered, in a comfortable temperature range, and you don't intentionally inflict pain and suffering and fear, that's good. You're good to go. That's fine. And it occurred to me that that's not fine. And in addition to, you got to do those things, but in addition to that, you owe it to the system to give the animal the opportunity to express instinctive behavior. Cattle in a feedlot are not, they're under stress because they're not able to roam and graze and express instinctive behavior. Chickens in a chicken house are stressed 24/7 because they can't express instinctive behavior, scratching and pecking and doing what chickens do. Same with hogs. They want to root and wallow in a farrowing barn on concrete. They can't do that. So that just hit me, and it shook me pretty good, because I'd always thought I would have beat you up if you said I didn't have good animal welfare.
Right.
But I didn't. But I thought I did. My animal welfare was what I had learned from my father, and what I learned at the University of Georgia, and what I learned from the many great cattlemen that I knew. But it wasn't good. Almost immediately, the land, the sustainability, the health of the land became just that obvious. I can remember looking at the soil, the dirt, we'll call it dirt, in my field, and then looking at the soil in the woods 10 yards away and thinking, I mean, this is a healthy, thriving, living medium, and this is a dead mineral medium. And I was the difference. My tillage and chemical fertilizer and pesticides is what took the life out of the soil. So I set about changing those two things. And the third issue that's important to me, the rural economy, was not on my screen. The other two hit me very quickly, but that one, this rural economy started failing at the end of World War II. That's when the industrialization, commoditization, centralization started, and when the impoverishment began. And also, I was born in 1954, so all my life it had been in decline. And I had no reason to believe that it wasn't supposed to be in decline. That's just the way that worked. And when I started changing the way I run the farm, I went from having 3 minimum wage employees to today about 170 employees that make well above the county average. And I didn't really notice it. I didn't notice what it was doing to the town. And I can remember one day I had a guest. I don't remember who it was, but I remember the guy being here. And we were standing in Bluffton. I'm sitting in the middle of Bluffton right now. More about that in a minute. But we were in town, and he said, "This is a nice little town." And I was waiting for the punchline, and there wasn't one. He meant it. And I looked like for the first time, I said, "This is a nice little town." And And it was becoming and today it is nice. You should come to see me.
I would love to.
It's a nice little town.
That's
just about
cool.
Everybody. We've got less than 150 people in town, and just about everybody that lives here just about everybody that lives here that works for White Oak Pastures. Now there's some old people and some welfare recipients and people that don't, but just about everybody that works for White Oak Pastures.
Wow. That's amazing and hard to imagine. Like, I feel like I come from a pretty small town. It's like 6,000 people, which sounds very large compared to where you're from. But like I've said to Rita, I love the idea of employing people, not for any other reason, but it feels good to be able to work with someone towards a common goal and to help them at the same time. Like it's an amazing thing. So I think that's really cool. I would love to come visit that town. I think it would be a different experience, but one that I would love.
Where are y'all? Where are you?
I live in British Columbia, about an hour and a bit outside Vancouver. So rural, but not that rural.
What about you, Rita?
I live in East Central Illinois. So yeah, rural, more rural than Cecily, but probably not quite as much as you.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that you had mentioned was the animals with their instinctive behavior. And I just want to take it back to that for a second, because that's something that we really try for on our very small hobby farm as well, is to let the animals live the way they were intended. Like, so many people don't even realize that chickens aren't vegetarians. They're actually pretty ferocious carnivores or omnivores, I should say.
Very ferocious.
Yeah, very. It can be quite something for someone who's not used to that, to see chickens in their natural state. But I really believe the same thing is true with humans too. We have to be able to express our instinctive behaviors. And like you said, it leads to depression in animals. And I mean, what we're seeing with one of the main reasons we did this series in particular was because we care about the health of people, not just that they're eating the best foods possible, but that, their food supply chain is like intact and secure, and they know what to do to take care of themselves and their families. But right now we
we know actually what's in our food. Yeah.
But we have a generation of people right now that are living human lives that actually are not instinctive to how humans were created. We're watching a lot of TV, we're pretty sedate, and that's just not what we were meant to do. And if you spend a day out on a farm or even working outside with your hands and like seeing a task from start to finish in completion and be able to create that and work at that, it does something to a human as well. It increases our feel-good hormones. And, I think the same is true. No matter what kind of creature you are, we have to be able to express those instinctive behaviors. And that's something that was so lost.
We have I formed a nonprofit 501c3 called CFAR, Center for Agricultural Resilience.
Right.
And we bring people in for training here. And one of the programs is the internship program. We take 6 interns 4 times a year, so 24 per year. And it's very competitive. We'll get 20, 25 applications for the 6 slots every time. So we're able to pick them pretty good. And my preference is to not have kids. I mean, there's nothing wrong. Everybody would say 18 years old one time, but I really like. We've had people my age on but typically they're 25 to 45, I'd say. And it's just a great experience to watch these people learn, and we pay them a little bit, but they make a financial sacrifice to be here. And we don't make it so they're here for the money. They're here for the education and training and understanding.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I can see like that 25 to 45 age bracket. That's kind of when people start realizing what's important to them in life, right? And exactly. That's why, it's very rare that you'll get an 18-year-old that has asked these questions about life and is ready to like make the kind of changes where 25 to 45, that's when, the scales start falling off your eyes and you want to make those choices that are aligned with your values. So love that.
You're exactly right about that. And we have great people here. I did not want an internship program. I actually drew up the program in self-defense because I had people telling me they wanted to come here and learn, and they would tell me when they were going to come and what they were going to do, and they were willing to work for free, but I can't let them work for free. I got to have workers' comp. I got to have this. Mm-hmm. So I sat down and drew up the internship program to dissuade people from coming. And it's free now. We don't charge. But initially I charged like $2,500 because I didn't want them to come. And they came anyway.
So
they
funny.
paid the $2,500 and came. Mm-hmm. And we later dropped the $2,500 because we were getting such good people. I didn't want to miss one. So and we hire a lot of them.
Oh, that's really interesting. That's very cool.
Yeah. So are most of them local-ish, or are they coming from everywhere?
They are very not local. We've never had this is a very industrial, commercial farming area. Mm-hmm. And the people here involved in agriculture are not on this. They're not on this train. I start to say they're opposed to what I do. That's probably a little overstated, but they're certainly they don't. They are professional industrial farmers, monocultural farmers. Their dad was, probably their granddad was, and they see, and they're good people. They see nothing wrong with it. Mm-hmm. These other farmers that don't drink my Kool-Aid are good people. I mean, they're absolutely fine people, and they like me. They don't feel like there's anything wrong with what they're doing to their land and their animals and their community. They think it's fine, and it's not. And they can't afford to do it differently.
Yeah, that's huge.
Economically.
What is the primary crop or animal or whatever? What kind of farming are these people primarily doing?
I am in the heart of the peanut, cotton, corn belt of the South. And almost none of my neighbors raise anything but peanuts, cotton, corn. And it's in a rotation. They plant all three every year, but it's a monoculture. The piece of land is rotated.
Well, we have definitely questions about that kind of row crop type farming, but before we get to that, something that I also wanted to ask you was, you had mentioned that like your neighbors, they couldn't afford to make that switch. And you had mentioned for yourself as well that because of the certain advantages that you had, it made it possible for you to make that transition, but you still suffered some consequences. So when you say they can't afford to do it, you know what you're talking about because you've kind of been there, done that, right? So how hard is it, do you think, for someone who doesn't have those advantages to make that kind of transition? Impossible?
Very difficult. I hate to say impossible, very difficult. Wow. And I think it may be harder today than it was when I did it. The food companies have started greenwashing today, and I didn't have to deal with that when I was getting started.
Right.
So it's very difficult, and I hate to report that to you because I want to see people, able to do this. And I'll say this: I made a number of mistakes, and one of the mistakes I made is I came into it a fairly large scale producer, and it never occurred to me to take a step back. I mean, it never crossed my mind that I should not have 700 cows. I should have a smaller number and do it differently. So, and then I guess that's enough of that.
No, that's very interesting because I think it's very easy for people to just say everyone should be regenerative farming. Like everyone just needs to make that switch. And if you don't, then there's something wrong with you and your values and your conscience and your character. But I think that's probably people just don't understand that it could spell ruin for a lot of people.
It absolutely can. And I've known people that it did. And I'll say something else. Producing food the way we produce it costs more.
Absolutely.
And I think the reason is because we don't cast expenses off for others. We can talk about that if you want to. But it costs more. I can't sell beef for the same price per pound as Tyson.
Right.
It concerns me. There are a lot of poor people in the world. A lot of poor people on the planet. There are a lot of poor people in this county. And they can't afford to pay more for their food. And I don't want them hungry.
Right.
And I don't have another plan. So I think it's not going to happen that we're going to convert to this kind of farming. But even if we could, I don't think it'd be a good thing.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's been my question the whole time, because I've listened to you prior to this and watched some of your videos and things. And I'm like, this sounds so great, but I just don't know how it translates for everyone. It's just, the more we get into the series too, I mean, my husband's a farmer. I understand some of the complexities just from our standpoint, but it just talking to people from different areas and different aspects, it's even more complex and more complicated than I originally knew myself. It involves so many facets. And so I don't know, Cecily, do you have something else to ask before we get into row crop farming? Because we did talk to Rountree a little bit about that, but how would you say that this translates, or can it translate at all to like row crop farming or grain farming?
Is it possible?
Well, I think it can, and I'm not a row crop farmer. I'm not a grain farmer, so I can't tell you exactly how that needs to look. But my best friend is a guy named Gabe Brown in North Dakota. And if you know who that is?
No,
I don't.
He wrote a book called Dirt to Soil. And Gabe is great, and he's got some livestock. He's primarily a row crop farmer, and it can be done. It's just like it's similar to what we do. Is you can't do it. You can't raise animals properly, and you can't raise corn and wheat and soybeans properly, and dump them at the Cargill or ADM grain elevator. Like I can't haul my properly raised cows and hogs to the Smithville or Tyson meat plant. There's got to be some sort of vertical marketing effort so that you don't have to own the processing. We do, but I don't recommend that. I own the processing because I did it in the early 2000s, and that was the choice I had, is to get out of business or process them. But it's got to be, I think that no matter what the commodity is, it's got to be a fairly vertically integrated kind of an operation that markets to a consumer that's willing to pay a little bit more for it.
Yeah. And vertical integration on a small scale, not where we've done it with all these large packing plants. And
I mentioned this earlier, but this is a very cyclical business, not a linear business. And in a linear production model like the one we got today, feeding the country, it's all based on scale. You can just scale it up infinitely. I mean, I guess there's not a limit to how big you can scale these things up. What we do here is not scalable. It's replicatable. You got to have a bunch of them, and I think that's the way it ought to be. I think you lose some efficiency, but I think you gain a lot of resilience. So efficiency and resiliency are yin and yang. And what we do here is highly resilient, not highly efficient. All we focused on in industrial agriculture is efficiency for the last 70 years.
That's true.
And we've gained incredible efficiency, but lost the resiliency.
Yes.
And in the ceaseless quest for efficiency, we have just spun cost off out of the system. That's why food's so cheap. You know, there's a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico that's as big as Massachusetts. That's because of the chemicals, pesticides, fertilizer washing down the Mississippi River.
Wow.
Now, that's not going to be paid for by the pesticide and chemical company. And it's not going to be paid for by the farmer. We're going to all pay. You're probably talking about billions of dollars. We're going to all pay it. Species being driven into extinction, whether it's microbes, insects, plants, animals, we're driving species into extinction all the time. And I am of the belief that every indigenous species has a role in the system. We may not be able to see it. You know, when the wasp sting me, I don't like it. But I think wasps have a place in the system. So and we're driving countless species into extinction. Well, extinct, they won't be back.
Yeah.
So whatever they did for us isn't getting done, or it's altered.
Right.
You know, pesticides are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. Polar ice caps. You know, they never use pesticide at the polar ice caps, but they're there. Microplastics, polluted water. You know, forget climate change. All these things that have incredible costs that we're not paying, and that's the reason the food is so damn cheap.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and people would argue that food is really expensive. And I don't know like what it is for you guys there. Here, we've seen a huge increase in food prices just because of inflation and all of that. However, if you're a farmer and know what amount of work actually goes into producing the food and the amount of money that goes into producing the food, that gives you a different bar for like what's expensive and what's not, right?
Well, it's inarguable that food is ridiculously cheap. I mean, look, what we pay today is historically way below what it's been historically anywhere in the world. I mean, it's just a little higher today than it was pre-pandemic, but still, food is just obscenely cheap. That's why we waste so much.
Well, and that's the horrible thing about it, right? We are wasting so much food. And so I think this lends itself to the question that we have for you. Like, and I think you've sort of answered this already, but I'd like to discuss it further. Like, can regenerative farming feed the world? And so Rita and I have had countless discussions on this because we see like all the gray area in it as well. But something
sit down. Let me tell you how it is.
Let's hear it. I'm ready.
The Earth, this beautiful planet we've got here, it has a carrying capacity. You know that once we get over the carrying capacity of the Earth, somebody's going to be hungry. And I don't know what that carrying capacity is. Part of me would say that we're not to it yet because we're wasting food. Everybody's eating and we're wasting food.
That's what I keep coming back to. There's so much waste.
But we're also diminishing resources to produce all this food. What about all that oil we're using that's not irreplaceable? You know, that we're producing cheap food because we got cheap oil, but we won't have any more. I mean, we got this. When it's gone, it's gone. We got cheap food because we're burning up the organic matter in our soil. You know, my soil used to be 0.5% organic matter. It's up to 5% now. But we're burning up the organic matter, and that's the life of the soil. And we're doing it all over the country where we're industrially farming. Pesticide residues, the water gone out of so many of our aquifers. On and on and on. We are we're not paying the cost that we're incurring as we producing all this cheap food. So I don't know that any of us really know what the carrying capacity of the planet is. I know it has one. But I don't know if we're way below it, because we're wasting food now and everybody's eating, but whether we're above it, because we're producing a lot of food, but we're doing it with resources that are not being replenished.
Okay.
So
go ahead, Rita.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
So
no, go.
The first thing that comes to mind when I hear the Earth has a carrying capacity is population control. Like, I'm just going to throw that out there because people are worried about that. So can you address that?
No, it's above my pay grade.
I feel like that might be like what we're kind of talking about, though, and I don't like that.
That's a solution, and I don't either. I got 3 children, and I've got 7 grandchildren, and if population control is the answer, I hadn't done a very good job. But yeah, I mean, population control. Now, do we need it today? I don't know. I just got through telling you that I could argue that we're living beyond our means right now, but I also argue that we're producing more than we're eating right now. So I don't. And these experts that want to talk about this, they don't know either. Here's a big tip for you: they don't know either.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we definitely on board with that. So it sounds like you have a belief that the Earth has a carrying capacity. And I can see...
I have that knowledge. That's what I believe.
And see, Rita and I, we both have like a Christian perspective and worldview. And I believe that God has, that under control, that he has a plan for this Earth. And none of this is a surprise to him. A lot of it might be, heartbreaking to him, but it's not a surprise. And I believe he has it in hand. But you brought up a couple things that I really wanted to talk about. One was, these kind of go together. So diminishing oil reserves that can't be replaced. So I would love to hear from your perspective as a regenerative farmer, what are some alternatives? I know a lot of people are, advocates for wind, for solar panels, but those don't have a perfect track record either, right? They come with their own consequences. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that. And then we should talk about water as well. Like you said, aquifers running low. So I know that's a couple of things, but if you want to jump in on some of that, that would be great.
We need to use a lot less petroleum. That's just as simple as that, because it is a diminishing resource. And at some point, we won't have enough to do any good. I mean, you can't just keep using up a diminishing resource, a non-irreplaceable resource. If you're asking what technology we need to go to next, you're asking the wrong guy. I'm a farmer, and I know a lot about this and nothing about a lot of these other things.
Yeah. So a lot of people
I'll say that I'm not advocating for solar, but I'm grazing over 2,000 acres of solar panels right now. I don't own them. I'm using my sheep for vegetation control on 3 huge arrays, and I think that I know that grazing is a far better ecological choice than mowing and spraying, which is what they used to do. We do a little mowing, we don't do any spraying, but I'm not. I am a great advocate for grazing solar arrays. I am not a great advocate for solar arrays. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's some ecological downsides to it, and I'm not qualified to assess them.
Yeah.
What was the other thing we were talking about?
Water and the aquifers, because that's something that Jason was talking about as well. He was saying that, they have all these ways of measuring like ecological soil health and stuff, but he's like, the focus really should be on water. Yeah. And you seem to echo that. Yeah.
We're blessed here. We're on the Ocala Aquifer, which is a replenishing aquifer. And we act as though there will always be plenty of water and it's free. I mean, it is free. The only cost is the energy cost of pumping it out of the ground. we waste the heck out of it. I don't mean me. I mean,
in general.
I do. The only irrigation I do is my garden. I do irrigate my garden. Mm-hmm. And the wastewater from my slaughter plants, the gray water, is I got a system to purify it, and we spray it out for irrigation. But I do very little irrigation, and I'm appalled at how much irrigation is done here. People will water a field so they can, with nothing growing out there, so they can harrow it. I mean, it's just they'll put out herbicide and then irrigate it to activate the herbicide, and they use the irrigation system to pump liquid fertilizer out, and water has to go with it. So there's incredible waste of water, and it worries me. And there are springs and wells. The Gulf of Mexico is about 80 miles down there. I mean, I'm in a place that's got a lot of water. But there are springs and wells that I played in as a kid that never ceased to run. They cease to run in the summer now. They'll come in the wintertime and they dry up in the summer. They didn't used to do that. So, I'm absolutely convinced we waste the heck out of water.
So you were saying that you really don't irrigate aside from your garden. And so do you think that comes down to just like soil health again, and the condition of your pastures?
Let me explain it. Good question. I told you that my land was 0.5% organic matter.
Right. Yeah.
And now it's over 5%. All right. 1% organic matter in the soil will absorb a 1-inch rain event. That's about 27,000 gallons of water per acre.
Okay.
My soil used to hold a 1/2-inch rain event. The rest of it would wash off. Now it'll absorb a 5-inch rain event.
Huge difference.
Now, that doesn't make my land drought proof, but it makes it drought resistant.
Right.
We get 52 inches of rain a year down here on the average. That's a lot for this. And if you've got, but we irrigate an incredible amount down here because we have destroyed the organic matter in the soil. So all that rain we get runs off. So we got to pump groundwater to replace it with. It's a horrible system.
This reminds me of the conversation we had about the carrying capacity of the earth, So we think there might be a certain number, and maybe there is. And like I said, if there is, God knows, that's my belief on that. But same thing, we're not really utilizing our food properly as far as carrying capacity, our resources properly. Same thing with water. It's not that we don't necessarily have enough water. It might be in the way that we're using the water. We're going for that, like you said before, the efficiency over resiliency. It's like when the government is borrowing a whole lot of money and the debt just keeps increasing. It's like, well, that money is not really coming from anywhere and it has to be paid back eventually. But how? Same thing maybe with water, right? We're kind of borrowing from the future in a way.
Yeah, and what you said about God and the carrying capacity. Make no mistake, God, nature, they'll win. That's the way we're going to go eventually. But I think what you've got to understand is we human beings, especially in the last 60 or so years, have made such absolutely incredible advances in technology that it has allowed us to do things that we probably shouldn't be doing. I mean,
I would agree.
Absolutely.
Couples have babies that can't have babies, and people are propped up so that they live to be way beyond any sort of normal quality life, and economically we incentivize a certain economic class to have more and more and more babies. And, there's just there's a lot wrong with what we've done to population control. That it ain't Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. It's a whole different deal.
Oh, absolutely. I agree that humans are the cause of the problems on Earth. When we think back to Adam and Eve in the garden, it was humans that they wrecked it. You know what I mean? And this is a conversation that Rita and I have had too. A big thing in Canada is medical assistance in dying. And while I don't agree with that, Rita and I have had the conversation that there are people living much longer than they normally would have with all sorts of medical interventions as well. And so these are all ethical questions is what it comes down to, right? So it depends on the ethics of the people that are making policy, et cetera.
And we are such an incredibly destructive species. If you think about we humans, we puny little humans, intellectually, we have developed technology that has given us such incredible power. You think about all the species of animals and plants and microbes for that matter, but animals, and what our capabilities are, our destructive capabilities are compared to theirs. It's just not even close. It's like everybody else and humans, and it appears that we have fully utilized that destructive power.
Absolutely.
And just can't quit.
Well, and again, and I hate to keep harping the Christian worldview because I don't know where you stand on any of it, but like you said before, animals should be able to live their instinctual lives, and left to themselves, that's absolutely what they will do. Humans, on the other hand, unfortunately, because of our sinful nature, our instinct, we have like biological instincts, but another instinct that we have is to become mini gods. We want to be God. And in our quest to become God, we're actually destroying what God has created. It's the same situation that was seen at the Tower of Babel, right? Like they wanted to build something to make themselves God. And God said, nope, see you later. I'm scattering you about the whole earth, and you have to figure out your new languages and how to rebuild. And I feel like we've been saying this since COVID hit in 2020, that we are a people that are trying to build Tower of Babel all over again, trying to make ourselves God while just destroying what God has created. So really, nothing changed.
I think we would agree on way more stuff than we would disagree on.
Yeah. Sounds like
This is a really practical question and moving in a different direction, but you mentioned the solar grazing earlier, and I find that interesting. I'm not for all the solar panel things, but I think that's a good use of your animals to graze around them. Absolutely. Okay. When it comes to the solar grazing, have you seen any issues with your animals being around all that, like all the solar panels and things? I don't know. I know there's like high voltage power lines that go through our area, and some people had a lawsuit for a while because their cows were not reproducing underneath of them. So I didn't know if there was anything that you've seen an impact at all with your animals.
I have not. I'm not saying there is nothing. I have not seen anything.
Just like a question that popped in my mind when I heard you talking about that. So
my employees that work in the solar operation every day. I mean, I got employees that go to the solar field every single day for 8-10 hours, or however long they work that day. And they're smart people, and they've bought little devices that I don't know what they are, but they measure stuff, and they know they have opinions on what's harmful and what's not.
Okay.
And now, so I don't know. I'm not about to say, "Oh, go on down there. It's fine, just fine." I don't know that.
Yeah.
I go myself. I'm not there. I'm not in it nearly as long as the people that work for me, because I got other businesses I got to see about. But I do go down there frequently, and I'm not too concerned about it. But that doesn't mean.
Yeah, I just wondered if you
worry about it. No, I think about it now. The rest of that question, this makes me feel a little bit better. We've been grazing the facility we've been grazing on the longest is 5 years. So we've had sheep that are pretty much down there their whole life.
Okay.
And they look fine, just fine to me. I can't say I've given them all thorough veterinary inspections, but they're lambing, getting pregnant, having babies.
Well, that's a good indicator. I mean, that's the primary thing that I've heard and that I know of is with the power lines, problems with reproduction. So,
yeah, I don't know. I'll say, but I will address the land. This land that we're grazing that's in solar panels was in cotton, corn, peanut production. And it was a dead mineral medium down to 0.5% organic model like mine used to be. And we're building the soil back. The environmentally, well, in terms of soil health, let's just do it like that. In terms of soil health, what we're doing is a hell of a lot better than what was being done, which is corn, cotton, peanuts.
Well, that's good to hear, honestly, because I've seen like pictures of what they call solar farms where it doesn't look like there's any green space at all. It just looks like solar panel. That's a bit of a tongue twister when you try to keep going. But it just looks like total steel and glass and nothing left of nature. So that was kind of my impression, that it was all like that. So,
well, no, most of it's not like that, but there are. I was invited to Al Gore's farm in Tennessee a few years ago, 3 or 4 years, 5 or some years ago, and I went up there, and then they had. It was his grandfather's farm that he'd reacquired. He was setting it up to be ecological paradise, he thought, but not. And he had a solar array, and they had literally put rock under the solar array and spraying weeds so it wouldn't grow out there. And it's just horrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it can be done poorly, or it can be done better.
It is done poorly, and it is done well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one thing we didn't really cover too much was row crops and regenerative farming, but maybe we did actually. And
I think we did.
Yeah, we did. Okay.
No, I told you I'm not your best guy.
Gotcha. Right. And then you mentioned your friend, and I wrote down his book. It's all coming back to me. Yeah.
Jay Brown is the best guy for that. And there are others, but he's just the one that comes from
there. I'm going to want to read that book. That sounds very good. So
it does sound interesting.
You should read that book.
I will.
Did you know I wrote a book?
We did.
Yeah.
Tell us about that, because I heard that on another podcast that I listened to you on, and I haven't read it yet.
We were contacted by Random House, Viking, Penguin. That's one company. And the agent that contacted me said that they were interested in my story, and if I'd write a book, they would buy it from me. I told him that I was honored that he was interested, but I can't write a book. I went to the University of Georgia 40 or 50 years ago, 1976, and majored in animal science, and I didn't read books then, and and I hadn't read one since I got out. So they came back. I turned him down. They came back and said that they had a young woman that they used as a ghostwriter to write the book, and they would hire her to do that. Mm-hmm. So we did that deal, and she was a sweetheart, about the same age as my daughters, just a little 30-year-old sweetheart. Mm-hmm. And I kind of fell in love with her a little bit because just so good.
Oh, that's so good.
And she lives in California. She spent a lot of time here, and we had an appointment every Friday afternoon. And it would be from 1 to 4 hours. It was painful.
Well, good thing you liked her, because it could have been really painful if you didn't.
Yeah. If I didn't like her, I couldn't have done it. But I did. And she would we were friends, but she was strictly business. We'd get all the hey, hi, yous out of the way, and she'd say, okay. She started asking questions. And she wrote the book, and I think she did a great job. I didn't, in many ways, I probably didn't give her much to work with. She did great.
Oh, well, I'm excited to read it because like I said at the beginning, and I know that, you don't like to be praised for your humility, but you really are a humble guy. And I feel like a very truthful guy. And if I'm going to take the time to read a book, I want to know that what I'm reading is truth. And I don't think you have it in you to tell a lie. So I'm looking forward to reading that.
Well, I'll tell you, you voiced your religious. There's a lot of obscenity in there, so you just gonna have to keep.
That's okay. That doesn't bother me.
Okay, all right. Just forewarned is all I'm doing.
No, you're being you, and that's all I want. So that's great. And what is the book called?
A Bold Return to Giving a Damn. See, it even starts out with
A Bold Return to Giving a Damn. I really like that title. No, that's great. I'm looking forward to reading it.
And how do you two know each other?
Oh,
the internet.
Man. The internet, yeah. We've actually never met. Yeah.
It's interesting because you talked about technology there at the beginning, and like we both sort of have this antagonistic relationship with technology, but that's how we met. So we can't hate it too much, right?
Yeah. And we do a podcast. I mean, so we're clearly utilizing it. We just also hate it.
Yeah. And I have to tell you how I came to we had Jason Rountree on the podcast is I judged livestock in high school, and we would go to MSU back when he was up there before this round at MSU. We would go up there and judge, and do practices with him and things. And so when we started to do this series, I started writing down all these people that I knew from agriculture, specifically cattle, and wrote his name down as a possibility and looked him up. I was like, oh yeah, he's going to be a good fit, like what he's into. And then Cecily mentioned you. Mm-hmm. And so I pulled up your interview on Joe Rogan and was like, listen, like, oh, I think he'll be a good fit. And all of a sudden you're like, there is one person when Joe asked you about colleges that are doing this. And I was like, he's going to say MSU and he's going to say Jason Rountree. And you did. And I was like, well, this was meant to be.
Meant to be.
Well, I'll tell you something else. If he had said, name another one, I don't know what in the hell
It's just funny how that worked out. So
yeah,
that's great.
Jason and I, you know Alan Savory? Are you familiar with the Savory Institute?
I know of it, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Jason and I both. I met Jason in Zimbabwe. We were both students of Alan Savory at his ranch in Zimbabwe to learn about holistic land management, and we kind of fell in love a little bit. We've been friends, and in fact, he's been here a number of times, and he's had me up to speak at MSU.
Oh wow!
Twice, I think.
Okay.
I'm so happy that this ended up that you guys were on the same episode before we even knew about all the workings of that relationship. Worked out well.
Yeah. I don't have many friends. I got all I want, but I don't have very many. And Jason is one of them. Jason is definitely one of them.
This was episode 1 in our 5-part series on food supply. We hope you gained a deeper understanding of where your food comes from and why it's important. But even though so much was covered, there's still so much to learn and talk about. In the coming week, we'll be talking to someone involved in ag legislation, food labeling, and how what the label says may not actually mean what you think it means, the barriers to actual farmers hanging onto their farm ground, a large animal vet, and a couple dairy farmers who are choosing to go against the grain a little bit. There's so much to unpack, and we're excited to bring this series to you. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review and subscribe or follow so that you don't miss anything from this series or any of our other upcoming deep dive series. Thanks for listening to the Boom Clap Podcast, where culture and conviction collide.